the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer. Amen. Has your life ever taken a completely unexpected detour such that you find yourself today in a place you never would have anticipated or imagined? Mine certainly has. In 1988, I finished Year 12 at Trinity Grammar School in Sydney. If you told me then that 5 years later I'd be married and studying theology, I never would have believed you. I had intended to become a mathematician or a physicist. If you told me in 1993 that 5 years later I'd be married and Liz and I would be, still be married, and that in 1993, if you had told me that in 1998 Liz and I would be living in Canada and I'd be enrolled in a Master of Christian Studies, I would never have believed you. In 1988, if you had told me that in 5 years after that, in the year 2003, Liz and I would be living back in Canberra, having left Canada, but have lived for 18 months in the Netherlands in that 5-year period, and had our first child, and named her Taya, and would be grieving over the death of my oldest brother Mark in 2002, I absolutely never would have believed you. And in 2003, if you'd told me that 5 years later, in 2008, I'd be an Australian Research Council postdoctoral fellow working in biblical Hebrew linguistics, and that I would be ordained as an Anglican, I simply would have thought you were mad. And then in 2008, if you had told me that in 2013 I'd be principal of an Anglican theological college, I'd be living in Adelaide, of all places, I simply would not have believed you, not for a second. And then in 2013, if you'd told me that in 2018, having spent 8 years at St Barnabas College as the principal there, that I would be working for the Pentecostals, Alpha Crucis College in Sydney, travelling around the country, I would have thought you're bonkers. And if someone had then told any of us at that time that on the 11th of March 2020, the World Health Organization would declare a global pandemic of a thing called COVID, and we would all be living in isolation, we all would have laughed that off as unthinkable. And then again, if you had told me during COVID that in 2024 I would be here at St Theodores, Toorak Gardens, and that in my first 2 years here I would have refereed over 250 soccer games when I wasn't even thinking of soccer or refereeing, and I would have lost 20 kilos doing that, I would have thought you're utterly insane. And this makes me wonder, where will I be in another 5 years or 10 years? What will I be doing that I can completely unimaginable in the present? Isn't life an incredible journey? I want you to think, what's your version of the story I've just told in your life? If someone had told you 5 years ago that today you'd be here in the place you are, in the state you're in, and things that have happened, probably you never would have believed it. In the Gospel reading, we find another such remarkable journey. I think the Magi would have felt very, very similar. We suspect these were Zoroastrian astrologers. I actually met my first ever Zoroastrian last year in 2024. He's a member of our soccer club. There's only about 80 to 100,000 Zoroastrian worshippers left in the world today, they estimate, mostly in India. He's from India. But I had studied this, so I knew a little bit about it. In fact, I think I knew more about it than he did, because he'd never really studied his own religion. But if you'd told those Magi who were sitting somewhere in modern-day Iran that in a few years' time that they would be travelling halfway across the world to a country they'd never heard of, into a language where people spoke a language they didn't know, that they would follow a star, quote unquote, to get there, that they would take their most valuable possessions, their gold, their frankincense and myrrh, and they would give them to none other than a freshly born baby, I'm sure they would have also said, you are completely nuts. If you had told them that once they're on that journey, they're going to meet not just anybody, but with the king of the land, who wished to meet with them in secret, again, they would have thought, no way that would have ever happened. Their unpredictable journey, full of detours and road bumps, misdirections, hazards, and miracles. But above all, I think if you had told those wise men that in 2,000 years' time, all over the world, once a year, the first Sunday in January, billions and billions of people every single year would tell their story, would be a marvel, and would still be trying to figure out why the hell did they take frankincense, incense and myrrh, and where did they come from, and how many were there, and what were they doing. They would never have believed you. Imagine that. This story is a remarkable story of a remarkable journey, and it's a story framed by God. God initiates the story, initiates the journey. God is the reason for their journey, the destination of their journey, the glue holding their journey together. How remarkable. And the narrator clearly thought this as well, because the narrator, whoever he or she was, the writer of the Gospel of Matthew, creates this beautiful literary contrast between Herod and the Magi. Herod is in the ruling political class. The Magi are esoteric social outliers, we imagine. Herod was part of the culture, the home culture. The Magi were foreigners, tourists, who knows. Herod, we read, was frightened. The Magi, we read, were, quote, overwhelmed with joy. Herod does his business in secret. The Magi are travelling in the open. Herod deceives in order to cling to power. The Magi bow before the young Jesus. Herod is Rome's proxy king. The Magi are seeking the true king. And above all, and I honestly think the writer of the Gospel of Matthew here is probably smiling as he or she wrote this. Herod can't find Jesus, even though he's literally under his nose. There's this detailed prophetic GPS about his exact location, even giving the town that he's from, and yet the Magi find him with pinpoint accuracy. Yet they don't even speak the language, and they've just dropped in from another country. Often when we think of the story of God, we find these archetypes of those who say yes to God and those who say no to God. In our creeds, as some theologians have wonderfully reflected upon, is the great yes of Mary. The only two people mentioned in the creeds are Mary and Pilate. Mary, who represents humans, the human choice to say yes to God, and Pilate, the human choice to say no to God. And here in this story too, we have Herod and the Magi. And if I look back on my story and my remarkable journey that I shared a little bit with you at the start, what's the best way I can give an explanation for this? What's the most coherent way for me to give an account for my life, which is intellectually robust and coherent and rational? It is, believe it or not, I think, the existence of God. I think the fact that there is a God who can be part of our lives actually gives the strongest account, the strongest rationale for the life that I have described and that so many people of faith describe. And that's what the Christian faith is about. It's about giving witness to this life of God that we have, telling others about it and saying, if you want to find out what this is like, we invite you to participate. Faith is like, it's like pottery, like learning to be a potter. You could watch 1,000 YouTube videos on pottery, you could listen to 1,600 podcasts, you could read books on pottery, and you'd not know a single little extra thing about how to actually throw a pot, would you? The only way you learn is to sit down and put your hands on it and spin it around, and whoosh, off she goes, and then spin it off. You know how it goes when you've tried it. That's my experience of pottery. But that's the only way. And so when people say, oh, Christianity doesn't make sense, or why do you do it? I always say, but give it a go, give it a go. Because hundreds of millions of people have found that in this way of life, they find the deepest blessing and meaning and coherence and presence of God in their lives. So God is the one who holds this story together. And do you know what symbolizes this for me in the story above all else? It's the star of the show. Yes, the star of the story. The star, literally the star. Scholars have spent a huge amount of time trying to figure out what this star has meant over the last 2,000 years. And as knowledge of cosmology and physics and maths has improved, they've got more and more sophisticated theories and more excited about trying to figure out what sort of cosmological phenomenon this could be. But as science sort of really came into the 20th century, or probably even before that, but in the modern scientific knowledge, and we apply everything we know about the universe to these phenomenon, scholars have come to the conclusion that there is no way in the world this could be any cosmological phenomenon that ever happened or ever could happen, unless it completely broke all the laws of physics. And you may think, well, what does that mean? Well, I think the answer lies in the brilliant work of arguably the world's leading Matthean scholar, Dale Allison Jr. from Princeton Theological Seminary, who's devoted his life to studying the Gospel of Matthew. And he argues, and in my mind compellingly argues, that the original readers, without any doubt at all, would have understood the star to be an angel, that they never would have thought of it as a cosmic being. Well, there would have been a sense that stars and moons and things in the sky were generally all thought to be divine beings or somehow imbued with divinity. But he says there's so much evidence, and he provides all the other literature from the period, which would have shown that the readers would have just simply understood this as being guided by an angel. And what I take from this is I think that's a beautiful metaphor for how our lives are led by God. You know, we may call it a career opportunity or a new job or a transfer or a set of circumstances or a tragic death or something. We describe it as part of the natural course of the world in everyday language. And yet as we reflect upon it and we think back about it, we think actually that was God somehow. That was God's hand, God's angel, God's presence was in fact in that thing. I want you to think about your story as I asked you to before. Can you identify any stars in your journey of life? Things that at the time or even afterwards you described in totally natural terms, part of the way the world is. But the more you thought about it, the more you thought that doesn't, it makes much more sense to think that that was God. It looked like a star, it sounded like a star, I'm going to tell it as a star, but it was actually a divine guiding by God. That's why I love this star in this story. What an incredible journey. It's a journey we use to describe the Feast of Epiphany, and Epiphany means to reveal something, a manifestation, a sudden knowing. It's a gigantic aha moment. It's like a massive OMG moment, but we realize the G in the OMG is actually real. And then our lives take a detour, we go in a new direction, something totally unanticipated. Just as the Magi came to Jesus in a way outside the norm, beyond conventional understanding, outside the formulas of faith development and church growth, we too can come on our journeys with God and find ourselves in such similar places of divine encounter. There are in fact three epiphanies in this story. There's the epiphany, the original epiphany that led the Magi to pack up, gather their most precious treasures and head off into the wild, unknown west. They would have headed west. There's the epiphany of actually seeing the baby Jesus and realizing, oh my God, I think this is God, this little baby kicking around. And then the fascinating final epiphany, the dream at the end, when they're told they're not to return to Herod but take another road home. So even on the way home, can you see there's another detour? Having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Another detour, another unexpected change of direction. So maybe here in this story of these Magi, we can learn some clues about how to live on these crazy, wild journeys of faith, going in unexpected places. We can expect moments of epiphany, of revelation, of aha, where we suddenly see God is actually been guiding us. We might expect stars, moments where we look back and we think that is the hand of God. And in the heart of it, we may also find that there is an opportunity for gift giving. If you told those Magi that after 2,000 years we would still be trying to figure out why they brought those three gifts, they probably would have killed themselves laughing. We don't really know why those three gifts, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that they chose the most precious things they could find in Iran, in Persia, packed them up and took them. And that when they got there, their only appropriate act, they were so overwhelmed with joy and gratitude that they wanted to give this gift as a symbol of a way of marking the moment, of saying that we bless and we're here with God. We want to give of ourselves. To give us a gift is to let go. It's to think of others. It's to wish well-being upon others. It's an expression of our love. We've just done all that at Christmas, haven't we? And so maybe there's a clue there to how we are to live on these journeys, that in these critical moments we are to find ways to find means of gift giving, to give so that others may be blessed and that their lives may flourish. Maybe we need to learn to let our lives unfold as they do, in totally unexpected ways, and to be open along the way to changes in direction, to God being with us. Mark them by the giving of gifts. I think, in fact, that's how God relates to us, isn't it? By journeying with us and giving us gifts and encountering us on the road, no matter where it goes. Amen.